In 2025, millions of people suddenly disappeared, fulfilling the prophecies written in the Bible and bringing chaos with them. Even though these events had been described thousands of years before, the general population tried to explain them without involving God, creating different theories about the cause of the incident, from dark plans by megacorporations to the appearance of extraterrestrials. Within this dystopia is Jonathan Stonegal, an important businessman. He is arguing with his partner Ed because Ed does not agree with Jonathan's financial decisions. As Jonathan is investing huge amounts of money in becoming the only credible news source, in addition to implementing a new social network called Eden and constructing a temple in the Middle East. Ed thinks that all these things are a waste of time, but Jonathan warns him that something big is coming and that he must choose a side. On another front, Rayford is a name associated with depression after the accident, since he was an airplane pilot when everything happened, an event that caused half of his passengers to disappear. And as if that weren't enough, when he arrived home, his wife and his youngest son had also vanished, so his greatest desire is to see them again. Meanwhile, the news broadcasts report on the state of the world and how violence and wickedness have multiplied incredibly after the incident, as a result of people's frustration and misinformation. In addition, a study is initiated which estimates the possibility of a second incident occurring soon, and they end up cutting the broadcast because the interviewer was being defensive after the event. Bob, the interviewer, then decides to visit his boss Steve because of what happened, expressing his discontent at having been forced to interview someone he describes as a conspiracy fanatic. Here, Steve and he begin arguing about the matter, with Steve insisting that it's just work to scare people and prevent them from taking to the streets and causing even more chaos, a notion that Bob does not like, which leads his boss to threaten to cancel his show. Later on the news, a political project is shown proposing to unite all nations into one in order to work together to achieve a reason and perhaps a solution to the disappearances. On another note, Chloe, Rayford's eldest daughter, is having nightmares about the disappearance of her brother. Here she is awakened by her father, and they both talk about their pain. In this way, Rayford takes the opportunity to try to convince her to follow her mother's Christian beliefs, convinced that only then could they see their loved ones again. Returning to Bob, he meets with a friend named Turk, who might be able to give him hints about good news for this occasion. He tells Bob about a discovery he made where the efforts to unite nations, as well as the vast majority of the media, including the channel Bob works for, are directly or indirectly owned by Jonathan Stonegal, who has managed to triple his fortune with the whole disappearance incident. Back with Chloe, she reviews some of her mother's belongings and finds her Bible. However, just as she is about to read it, she receives a message from Bug, since they had both agreed to have a meeting during the course of it. The man tells her his current discontent with his work, since they have forced him to lie about what is really happening in the world, longing to return to when he was starting out and actually spoke the truth. But suddenly the conversation is interrupted by a strange message on all nearby phones, which alerts that a second wave of disappearances had occurred. Hours later, Bob returns to the studio where he debates the disappearances with important people, some of whom attribute them to a divine force. However, he thinks that it is due to a new technology, like in science fiction movies, arguing that by this point in history, the capabilities of human beings should no longer be a surprise. Simultaneously, Jonathan is giving a press conference where he presents the plan to unite all nations, a new world order, as a countermeasure against the falling market prices, which would cause several nations to go bankrupt within 2 months. To avoid this, he argues that if everyone were united under the same flag and the same currency, all would have equal opportunities and the possibility to help each other, thus mitigating a potential worldwide conflict over resources, and he promises to use his personal fortune to achieve this goal. After this, Bob meets with his boss and tries to talk to him about what he knows concerning Jonathan and the New World Order. But Steve is not interested in promoting a conspiracy theory and flatly refuses to expose that to the world. Meanwhile, Rayford tries to study the Bible to understand that there is absolutely no information on the internet about it, since everything had been erased or censored as a result. He even attempts to go to a church, convinced that he needs to learn more. But upon finding it closed, he manages to sneak inside, only to realize that it had been vandalized from within, because at first people had decided to blame Christians for the disappearances, a hatred that has persisted to this day. However, inside the church, Rayford finds Pastor Burns. At the same time, Chloe is attacked by a thief. Both struggle, and although she manages to repel him with pepper spray, she ends up with a cut on her arm. Returning with Rayford and Pastor Burns, they both discuss what happened, and the pastor confirms to the man that the disappearances were a divine matter, later arguing that he stayed because that's what God asked him to do. However, Rayford knows very well that he is lying about why he stayed. Meanwhile, Chloe visits Dr. Wright, a friend of her mother who treats her wounds. Here she meets Fern, an older, very wise woman. On the other hand, Rayford manages to convince Pastor Burns to study the Bible together to better understand the disappearance. So the two begin to gather information in the hope that at least one more person will be interested in learning the truth. In this way, they both watch a recording of a pastor talking about the disappearances, in which he begged people to follow the path of God during the time they had left on earth in order to earn heaven. Upon hearing this, both Rayford and Bob decide to accept God into their lives. Later, Dick and Bob meet after the former managed to hack into Eden's database, discovering that the application is designed to take over all of your personal information, and with the New World Order plan, it will become the only existing method of payment. Therefore, if you refuse to use it, it will be impossible to buy even basic things such as food or a bottle of water. As a result, both decide that they will use that evidence to let the world know the truth. But it is Dirk who will do this, so that if something goes wrong, Bob can take the evidence and use his reputation to spread the truth. Returning to Rayford, he tries to convince his daughter to accompany him to church, but she says she is busy taking care of Mrs. Firm because she does not want to go. However, she wants to go to church to be baptized after hearing that Pastor Burns was there. On the other hand, Bob once again tries to convince Steve to broadcast the news, but Steve ends up canceling his show and firing him, with the police escorting Bug out of the building. After this event, Bob returns with Dirk, and the two consider the possibility that the second wave of disappearances never occurred since no one seemed to recognize anyone who had vanished in the past few days. Therefore, they start to investigate the names of the supposed missing persons in Eden's database. There they discover that these people never existed, which meant that the second wave was a hoax. Because of this, both prepare to broadcast the truth to the world, asking for help from Connor, a co-worker of Bug, to help them with the equipment. However, while they were loading things into the car, Dirk discovers that there is a bomb in it. He manages to warn those who are able to get away in time, but he does not share the same luck. Meanwhile, in the church, Chloe, Dr. Wright, and Rayford are all attentively listening to Pastor Burns, who is explaining to them about the Great Tribulation in the coming years following the rapture of God's church, a Christian term for the disappearances, in which he tells them that the only way to see their loved ones again is by remaining on God's path until that period ends or they die. All this information seems to be too much for Chloe, who decides to leave the place without many explanations. Returning to Bob, after the explosion incident, he goes back to Dirk's hideout to retrieve his laptop, which contained all the information. He manages to do this without any problems. However, while they were trying to escape stealthily, he is discovered by two agents who begin chasing him, a situation that forces him to run for his life and then hide in a trash container, hoping for the best. This confuses the agents, but they still decide to shoot the trash container, and although Bob comes out unscathed, the laptop is hit by one of the bullets. On the other hand, Jonathan meets with Nicholas, an important politician who supported the rise of Eden and the New World Order. While they were talking, Jonathan chooses him as his successor in case something happens to him. In the following scene, Bob receives a call from Connor, who informs him that several of his co-workers have been murdered by federal agents, only to then confess that the prophecies are coming true, assuring him that the answers he is looking for are in the Bible. Returning to Rayford, he has a conversation with Dr. Wright about faith, since both of their partners were believers and had disappeared. Here she realizes that the God of her time is real, and Rayford convinces her to open the door to Jesus so that she might see her husband again. Meanwhile, Chloe is at the cemetery exhuming her grandmother's grave, who had been a believer during her lifetime. when suddenly Bug arrives to help her. When they open the grave, they discover that not even the bones of the woman are there, despite the fact that she had died 8 years ago, which meant that her body had been raptured along with the rest of the Christians. Seeing this with her own eyes, Chloe understands this fact as undeniable proof that God is real. In this way, Pastor Barnes and the rest of the believers gathered together with Chloe, although the latter still has her doubts about whether to follow the path or not. During this moment, Bob takes the opportunity to call James, an important doctor and colleague of Nicholas and Jonathan, to warn him about the latter's intentions, the true motive behind Eden and the deaths of his colleagues, asking him to let Nicholas know about this information beforehand. Chain then decides to talk with Nicholas, who asks for an audience with Jonathan to confront him. Meanwhile, Bob gives the news to the people in the church, planning to unmask Jonathan. This seems to cheer them up, and Rayford tries to get him to stay. However, his skepticism makes him step away. Nonetheless, Chloe convinces him to at least listen to what they have to say, where some believe that Jonathan is the Antichrist. Here, Bob examines the investigation which, although it made sense in light of the Bible, turned out not to be sufficient proof for the incredulous young man who sees all this as just another conspiracy theory. And although Jonathan is evil, he is not supernatural. After this, Bob decides to leave with Chain to be with him when they confront Jonathan, despite Chloe advising him not to listen. And despite the wishes of his girlfriend, Bob convinces him to let him go, giving him a cross necklace as a sort of protective amulet. In the following scene, Buckley takes all the evidence to Chain, who, despite everything, explains that he doesn't know what to do because Jonathan was financing the reconstruction of the temple in the Middle East, and he, being Jewish, was more than happy since that temple would be right on the border where both Arabs and Jews could worship together by signing a 7-year peace treaty. Upon hearing this, Buck clearly recalls what was being said in the church, understanding at that moment that everything was real because the Bible had described the very event in specific detail. In the solitude of the bathroom, Bob repents for not having believed sooner, asking God for forgiveness through tears and accepting him in his life, praying for directions on what to do next. Bolstered by this, Bob gains the courage and goes with Connor to finally confront Jonathan, exposing all the evidence against the diabolical man, being supported by Nicholas. But suddenly, time seems to stop. Nicholas changes his stance and reveals that he is the Antichrist, proceeding to cold-bloodedly murder Jonathan in order to inherit the project and the company, thus becoming the new master behind the New World Order. After this revelation, Bob warns Chloe and Connor before putting a desperate plan into action. In this way, they hack and interrupt Nicholas's live broadcast just as he was about to announce Jonathan's death. Here, Bob appears to tell the people the truth about Nicholas, in addition to inviting them to follow God, the only path truly worth following in their ruined world. Immediately after, Vox manages to escape but is pursued by federal agents. However, he manages to board a small plane piloted by Rayford, accompanied by Chloe and Pastor Barnes, who fly over the city distributing leaflets containing the one truth, the truth that leads to God's path.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.